Hello everybody, Kris Gethin here, and welcome to another episode of the Knowledge and Mileage podcast. I've been looking forward to this particular episode for quite a while now, because I'm sure you've heard me talk about telomeres. However, I am not the expert in this area at all, but you've heard me talk about the importance of your biological age over your chronological age. So, who better to discuss this topic than Dr. Dave? Thank you ever so much for coming on to the show, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kris. Thanks for letting me share.
I appreciate it. Now, guys, I hope you are looking after your immune system. And you've probably heard me say many times before that your gut is your first brain, not your second brain. The reason why I say that is because 70% of your immune system is determined in your gut. And this is why you probably heard your grandmother say you are what you eat. So if you're going to eat bad, your immune system could be compromised. So at this time, when we definitely want our immune system not to be compromised, it makes sense that you eat well and you supplement even better. Think about feeding your friendly bacteria in your gut now. And you've heard me probably talk about P3OM before, because this is a probiotic that I've been taking and suggesting for many years now. And I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to get 20% off this right now. All you got to do is go to www.p3om.com/Kris, Kris 20. Let me spell that out to you. www.p3om.com/Kris 20 if you want to check out the Navy SEAL team of probiotics right now. Could you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself, how you actually got into measuring telomeres as well, and your backstory which led into it? Because I know that you come from generations of people in the family in the medical field.
That's correct. I like to call us a family of healers. Several of my forebears were physicians. We had a pharmacist in there, and also scientists and engineers. So my father was a practicing family medicine doctor when I graduated medical school. So I actually practiced with my dad for 6 years, and it was fascinating because I had an internal medicine background, and family medicine is quite different. But I had done a unique residency that allowed me to do some geriatrics and some pediatrics, so I was well equipped for it. And I practiced with him, as I said, for 6 years, and then we amicably parted company. I joined a huge internal medicine practice, and kept obviously in close touch with my dad, who was really an idol, an early idol of mine. I really admire. He's gone now since 2000, but I admired him immensely, and I watched him rather quickly age. When he hit about, I'd say 74 or 5, he started to really age rapidly. He made it to 79 before he passed away, and the way he died was actually quite fascinating. He was playing tennis, and when he got out of the car on the way home, it was icy here in Pennsylvania, and he slipped and he fell, and he had a little trouble getting up. The next morning he was really sore in his back. The next morning he couldn't move, but he still went to work. And it turns out he had compression fractures of his spine. And my dad was suffering from what is known as andropause. And andropause is a testosterone deficiency that happens in men. And it can happen anytime between age 30 and age 80 or never. It's not like a menopause that happens in all women. But that was how I kicked off into the anti-aging thing, because I've been talking to him about when I watched him lose stature, get shorter. He didn't want to go on any of the growth hormone or testosterone replacement, which was what was in vogue at the time in anti-aging medicine, but it probably would have helped save him. But he was the doctor too, and the father, and the son doesn't tell the father. And I always regretted that I wasn't more forceful, but it really kicked off my career in anti-aging medicine, because I'd been researching it and I'd been studying it, but I went and got formal training in it and eventually got board certified in anti-aging medicine. I was one of the first 30 people in the country to be certified in what was called age management medicine. This was the official version of anti-aging medicine that the AMA, American Medical Association, recognized. So I was early in the game on both of those things. This is year 2000 and 2001. And I practiced internal medicine for another 4 or 5 years strictly, and then I went into anti-aging and regenerative medicine. I eventually started my own vitamin company because I believed that nutrition and supplements were actually extremely helpful in combating the aging paradigm that we've been taught to accept. And then I became a telomere expert, and then I became a stem cell expert. And along the way, and there early in the game, I was an omega-3 fatty acid. I'll tell you that the fish oil craze that is happening now is due a lot to yours truly. I had a lot to do with that. A lot of my words were copied. A lot of my stories were copied. A lot of the stuff that I did as a scientist and physician was used. And of course, I've been selling and making my own fish oil since 2002. So that was my nutraceutical vitamin career that led to the telomere expert career that led to the stem cell expert career.
Right. Interesting.
That's me. And all of it anti-aging and regenerative medicine based.
Yeah, fascinating. And, obviously having some discussions with you, I was quite alarmed by how much fish oil is needed, specifically, for certain individuals. But, having the correct amount of EPAs and DHAs in your system, especially for the purpose of health and anti-aging. And obviously I'm taking your supplement, now your fish oils, I'm taking your other supplement that I've got right here that we'll discuss a little bit later. So, speaking about the anti-aging, before we actually get into the telomeres then, you said, had you'd known what you'd known now, or if you'd been a little bit more forceful, you would have had your father on like hormone replacement therapy or testosterone replacement therapy. So is this something that you advise to pretty much everybody over a certain age? Or, obviously you'll check their testosterone levels to prevent the onset or the increase of the aging process to older individuals, such as myself, being 45 years old now.
Well, just remember I have 15 years on you, Kris. So, everybody. No, I never recommend one single prescription for everybody. I think that andropause in men is an illness. It's treatable. We don't say that menopause is an illness. We accept it as a natural phenomenon. But of course, women can go through hormonal treatment. Did quite a bit of that myself until the medical legal area of that got rather sticky. But another story for you, when I started, around 2000, I got a lot of letters from my colleagues in my hospitals asking me to get sensible and stop using testosterone therapy in men. And I had a lot of clinical vignettes I could share with you of men who were untreatable with heart failure and bad diabetes who got better on this therapy. And I remember having a discussion with one of my cardiology friends saying, hey, as soon as the drug companies get a hold of this, you'll see it's all going to be okay. Right now you're calling me a quack. You're telling me I'm not practicing good medicine, but I promise you the pharmaceutical industry will get a hold of this and it'll be A-okay. Well, about 4 or 5 years later, you started seeing is it low T commercials. So, once they could patent it and make some money off of it, it was all okay. But not for everybody. I mean, not all men need it. Not all men go through it. A significant number of men do. Some people need more than others. And again, we're talking about physiologic hormone replacement. We're not talking about bodybuilding doses. We're talking about just bringing your testosterone level up to what we consider optimal, which for us is somewhere around age 35. That's sort of the cutoff point. Once you pass 35, you're starting to slowly but surely dig into your reserves. So this is where I would start looking. I will say the youngest person I ever saw who had andropause actually had a hypothalamic failure, no known cause, was 29. And that person, when I started treating him, his life changed dramatically because at 29 to have low testosterone is no fun. Maybe for a 55, 60-year-old person, 65, 70-year-old person, it's not as big a deal. But there are medical complications from it. And one of them is osteoporosis. Men get it too. And it's an age-related thing. The older they get, the more osteoporosis they get. And, you talk about broken hips, broken spines and broken hips. This is osteoporosis in men. And it's a deadly condition. Not less than 50% of the people who break a hip leave the hospital. And of those 50%, I shouldn't say leave the hospital, but leave the hospital to their former condition. And the morbidity and mortality is very, very high. So for that, for congestive heart failure, for diabetes, there are some indications where testosterone supplementation, if it's indicated for hormonal reasons, is very, very useful in the health of the aging male. So
Right.
not for everybody, but it's something that I would check routinely.
Yeah, for sure. And, what I find is fascinating as well, not only are you one of the world's best doctors in anti-aging medicine, but you're also an athlete. You compete in marathons and half marathons and whatnot. Like I noticed when I started participating in endurance sports and I did like Ironman triathlon, ultra marathon, I noticed that my testosterone levels had got lower. So, as soon as I started trying to back off on that lengthy training, because I'm still doing bodybuilding at the same time. So there's probably a lot of overtraining happening there. My sleep wasn't the best. And I'm sure that that was increasing the onset of the aging process within myself. So how do you combat that yourself, participating in endurance sports, which could potentially decrease your testosterone levels? Are there natural therapies that you do, such as, increasing your fats or, having your higher fish oils, making sure that you're quantifying your sleep, etc.?
Yeah, I'm actually looking for, how do I do it? Well, since I own a vitamin company, I do it with this. This is Super Max X. It's a supplement I make. And there is natural, the way the law is now is obviously testosterone and anabolics are frowned on for a lot of reasons, but I'm blessed in the sense that I don't have to have that for my replacement because I don't need replacement at this point yet, even though I'm 61. But what I do is I use that supplement, which has pine pollen, and pine pollen gets converted to androstenedione, and androstenedione gets converted into testosterone, or is in the stream of those testosterone steroidal-based hormones. So that's one thing. The other thing I do is I don't do those long runs anymore. I don't do the ultra marathons. I did 3 of them, and I'm over. Well, right now I'm about 190, 95. My physique is a little bit more muscular, sort of like yours. It's not really built for. I'm not a small person. Smaller people tend to do better. From biomechanical standpoint. Plus, having a highly educated background, I sat a lot. So launching myself into the ultra marathons in my 50s, it was not without, it wasn't, I didn't prepare as well as I should have. And I learned very quickly that if I wanted to be walking when I was 100 or 110, I would probably have to lower the distance. So right now I shoot for 5Ks and 10Ks, and do a little bit more of a hit interval training. I think hit interval training is a great thing. A good friend of mine, Phil Campbell, wrote a wonderful book called Ready, Set, Go, Synergy Fitness. A lot of people don't know about Phil, but a lot of people know about Dr. Mercola, and Dr. Mercola interviewed Phil and took Phil's book and turned it from, I think Phil called it I don't know what he called, I think he called it the Great 8, and Dr. Mercola called it the Peak 8. So, and then Dr. Sears, also a colleague of mine, anti-aging doc, came out with his cardio book. So HIIT became very popular thanks to my friend Phil Campbell. And, it's been around forever. It's been around since period of World War II. So, but I do some HIIT in there. I do some weight training. What I do mostly now these days, Kris, is actually bodyweight gymnastic type training, handstands, crow. I do a lot of yoga because, flexibility is something that gets taxed. And I was never a flexible person. I'm becoming a lot more flexible in my 60s than I was in my 50s and 40s. But what's appealing to me is the whole body weight thing, being able to control your body weight in inversions and in different things. And it doesn't build quite the muscle bulk that I used to have when I was a weightlifter, but it certainly contributes to flexibility and body awareness and body mechanics. So I love it. I love that discipline. And I pretty much, I won't say I don't do any weight training anymore. I train maybe once, twice a week at most for 20 or 30 minutes. But most of what I do is again, body weight. And then I try to maintain a good cardio with a combination of HIIT and long, slow distance type stuff. Again, long now being 5 to 10K instead of 100K or 125K.
Right. Got it. Okay.
And so I think that the best way is, if you have this overtraining issue, to be aware of it. And I was just like you. I was running marathons and weight training, and the two couldn't be more diametrically opposite. So you got to sort of kind of pick your discipline. And these days, my athleticism is strictly designed to keep me healthy.
Yeah,
it's
got it.
Fit. It's just I want to be healthy. I want to be functional, and I want to feel good and look good as long as possible. And so, I work out to keep myself healthy.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of us want now, especially as we become a little bit more mature, we become smarter, and we think, okay, what am I healing my future or harming it? Even though I may look good, I got the six pack, I can do a marathon, is that really healing or harming me? So, I look at, like, for instance, the typical bodybuilder diet. You're eating, 5, 6 times a day, signaling that mTOR pathway, and then possibly overtraining, consuming a huge amount of food that, we really don't know a lot of the sources. Like, I always try to go humane raised and organic and wild caught, but a lot of people don't. So they're over consuming these types of food. So, we're always trying to find a balance. Should we start intermittent fasting with this? Maybe that's on our non-training days. And, there's a few things that I like to do. I read a lot of Dr. Rhonda Patrick's stuff on heat therapy, like the sauna, and she's a huge advocate of HIIT training as well. Any way that we can kind of produce a lot of these heat shock proteins. And which I find fascinating. So I'm trying to do a bit of the both now. I'm not doing the long distance ultra marathons, maybe a half Ironman or something like that every now and again. But my training is really backed off. I do a lot more of the sprints, the hill sprints. The only time that I'll go long and slow would be maybe on a Sunday, because you have to get used to the saddle time or something like that. So when we get into the telomeres now, there's a lot of people wondering, like, what are telomeres? How can they measure our biological age over our chronological age? Could you give us a background description of what a telomere is?
Sure. Everybody has a little bit of a different definition. So I'm going to give you a functional definition first, and then I'll describe what it is anatomically or physiologically. Functionally, I call it the biologic time clock of the cell. So the telomere it's kind of like another way to think about it is if your cell had a parking meter that determined how long it lived, and you could put quarters in it, the meter starts to move down, and you put another quarter in, and it moves back up, but it doesn't quite go back up to where it was. And this continues to happen over the lifetime of that cell, and eventually the red thing comes up and says expired. And in a cell, two things happen. Either the cell removes itself completely by committing suicide, that's called apoptosis, or it goes into what's called senescence. And senescence is where it is no longer really functional, and it's not able to replicate and contribute to the repair of your body. So as most people know, the body replicates itself. The number that's thrown around is every 7 years, except for heart and brain. So there's a lot of cellular replication going on a minute-by-minute daily basis. And each time the cell replicates, the telomere gets shorter. So the biologic time clock is ticking, and it gets shorter. And the longer your telomeres, generally speaking, the better your health, and generally speaking, the longer you live. There are other factors, of course. But it turns out to be a lot like a central clearinghouse where all the pathways that everybody's identified with aging sort of point right to that telomere, and that telomere, as it shortens, tells you your biologic age. Now, how does that fit with your chronologic age? Okay, how old you are in birthdays is your chronologic age. Your biologic age is how old you are functionally or physiologically. So what we've discovered is that you can stabilize telomere length, you can slow down the loss, and with certain supplements and certain other therapies, you can actually lengthen your telomeres. And in populations that have longer telomeres, they have better health and they live longer. That's how that goes. What's not known is what happens, strictly speaking, in a large group of human beings when you start aggressively treating telomeres. We know, at least I know, it's not harmful. I'd like to tell you it pretty much guarantees everybody a longer and healthier life. That's a very difficult experiment to do, and as a scientist, I can't really come out and say that until there's enough longitudinal data, and that's going to take a lifetime or two. But I can tell you in my own experience, my biologic age when I started treating my telomeres was 60, and I was 50 in birthdays. So I was 10 years older biologically. So when someone has a problem and they're a few years older and they're all freaked out about it, I have to laugh because I was a decade older. And, I started doing some telomerase activation things. I started paying more attention to sleep. I measured my hormones to make sure they were all okay, and started meditating regularly, started changing my athletic pursuits and overtraining less, and being a little more sensible and quote unquote mature about things. And after a few years, my telomeres were a few years younger than my biologic age. And the last time I checked, I'm about 4 or 5 years younger. So, I'm not 4 or 5 years younger, I'm about 45 years old by my telomeres. So I'm 61 or 60, I'll be 61 shortly. But my telomere length now is at that of a typical 45-year-old. The more data we get, the more we know, and the more people that get the tests, the more we can stratify this and get a really good look at it. But the test that you did, the lifelong test, has been done in thousands and thousands of people. And the database is big enough now that it is really quite accurate, reproducible, and tells you what you need to know as far as chronologic and biologic age.
Interesting. Yeah, I obviously did my research because, before I come to life length, because there's so many, there's other telomere tests out there that you can get. So, I guess it's much like you can purchase blue light blocking glasses off Amazon, and they're just like $5. Or you're going to get some that that is backed up with research and they're more quality. They're going to cost like $50 or something like that. Would you say it's the same within the telomere industry, where you can get these kits, they could be sent to your house? Is there the accuracy within them as well? Or, it's basically a shot in the dark because other companies are just putting them out there so cheap?
Some of my friends are in that part of the industry, so I'm going to tread lightly here, not to offend them. But the telomere is a piece of DNA. DNA is very fragile, and if it's not handled or preserved properly, it can degrade. The interesting political/scientific situation in the U.S. versus Europe is the use of a test called a qPCR, which is very common in the United States, and it was qPCRs have been around for 20, 25 years maybe, and at least 10 or 15 years in the telomere industry. And it was used by our Nobel laureates in the U.S. who won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 2009, Liz Blackburn, Joe Sostak, and Natalie Greider. All of them used qPCR in their research. Richard Cawthorn, early telomere scientist who has a huge database, uses qPCR. So there's a lot of heavy hitters in the U.S. who use this particular way of measuring, and their database is large, but a lot of times it wasn't necessarily used for anti-aging or chronologic versus biologic age. And with that test, you can only get an average telomere length. And the telomere distribution is not a perfect bell-shaped curve. It's more like Mount Everest over here and then a slow slope over that way. So I don't like, as a clinician, I don't like using qPCR tests. They're also not that reproducible. I did that experiment myself, and I used one of the more famous qPCR tests and took some blood from my arm at the same vein and collected it and put it in 2 tubes and cheated a little bit, gave him my sister's name, who's a year or two older than I am, and there was about 700 base pairs difference, and it was my blood from the same arm and the same blood draw. So 700 base pairs is about 7 years of inaccuracy. As far as the salivary tests, don't like those at all. I'll simply say that. I just don't.
Okay.
As the database gets big enough, you can fudge your way out of just about anything with a good set of statisticians and a big enough database. But for individual one-on-one counseling the way you had, you can't beat LifeLink's HTQ fish. There's just nothing else that's that accurate, that reproducible, and has been used for this purpose. And it's really the only way you can truly calculate your biologic age versus your chronologic age. So
Right. Interesting. Yeah, that's what I like, is that you follow with a consult, and I had one obviously with yourself that could tell me, okay, so this is where your baseline is now, and this is what you've got to do in the future in order to help maintain or slow or reverse that process of the telomere lengthening. Hey guys, I am interrupting this podcast. I apologize, but it's for good reason, because I want to tell you about one of my all-time favorite products, and that is Laird's Superfood. Of course, they have some awesome creamers. It's the only coffee that I now use to drink and put up my butt for my coffee enemas, of course. But I want to talk to you about the performance mushrooms that they have, because I absolutely love these. And mushrooms, as you know, are well documented for immune system support. And that's what we all want to do, isn't it? All year round, but especially right now, look after your immune system. But not only that, they've been shown to enhance your cognition. That's why I'm so smart. Anyway, so the performance mushrooms that they have, you can mix it in any sort of beverage. You can put it in your cereals, but they have chaga, cordyceps, lion's mane, Mateki. Am I saying that right? Matake. Please do comment and let me know if I said that correct. I probably didn't. But anyway, it's absolutely awesome. Not only do they have the performance mushrooms, but they have a hot chocolate with functional mushrooms as well. So you can get the best of both worlds. So whilst you're giving yourself a little cuddle indoors and you're nurturing yourself, you can have some performance mushrooms as well. I tell you what, this stuff tastes badass. And they have something that fits pretty much every diet. It's gluten-free, it's dairy-free, paleo approved, keto approved, non-GMOs, soy-free, etc. I absolutely love these guys and this product. So do you want to get a discount? I'll give you 20% off. All you've got to do is head to www.laird's Superfood. I'll spell that out now. That's LAIRD Superfood, SUPERFOOD.com. All right. I'm also going to put this in the show notes. And when you enter the code Gethin20, GETHIN 20, you will get 20% off your first order. Don't say I never get you anything. Hey guys, now I have been using CBD for the past couple of years. Why? Because I freaking love it. I've been using CBD one night on and one night off with the tincture to help me sleep. And it has really helped with my deep sleep cycles. Obviously, I quantify my sleep and I've noticed a profound effect with my deep sleep cycles, hence why I take it. I also have the body butter or the balm, whatever you want to call it. Some people utilize it for like ailments, inflammatory purposes. And I just use it because I have terribly dry feet. And it works. It's the only thing that works. I don't want to gross you guys out, but I'll blame it on my parents because it does run in the family. But what I use is a company called Ned, N-E-D. The reason being is because they have zero isolates, no synthetic ingredients, there's full transparency, third-party testing, lab reports you can find on their website. And it's a full-spectrum hemp-only CBD that has just two ingredients, the hemp extract and non-GMO organic MCT oil. That is it. Absolutely love it. They do have a further line. They have other things like lip balm. They have aromatherapy oils, but I am personally just using the CBD tincture, as I said before bed, and the body butter. But during this time when people are suffering from forms of anxiety, some types of depression, PTSD even, I find that CBD does help, and a lot of my clients have reported the same. So if you're suffering from any of these ailments, as well as possibly sleep or dry feet or inflammation, then I would suggest that you try CBD. And this hemp oil from Ned, which I think is absolutely phenomenal, are offering my podcast audience 15% off plus free shipping of the first order. All you got to do is go to www.helloned, that's HELLONED, ned.com/Gethin, GETHIN, and enter Gethin at the checkout to get 15% off your first order plus the free shipping. I'll spell that out again, but you can find it in the show notes. That's HELLONED.com/Gethin, GETHIN, and type in Gethin at the checkout to get 15% off. Thank you, Ned. I know we're all supposed to be social distancing from each other right now, but how about social distancing yourself from bad foods? Because, as you know, this is going to compromise your immune system. So whilst you're social distancing yourself from the bad food, how about feeding your immune system with good bacteria and a good probiotic? P3OM is a patented single-strain probiotic that I always tell people is the Navy SEAL team in your gut. If you want to strengthen your immune system, it makes sense that you strengthen it by feeding your gut with good bacteria. I've been taking P3OM for many, many years. If you are one of my clients, you'll know that I've suggested it to you as well because it is the bomb. Now, if you want to get 20% off this probiotic strain, you can get it right now by typing in KRIS20 when you go to www.p3om.com/Kris. That's www.p3om.com/KRIS20. So what are the factors, because you discussed this with me, obviously, but for our audience, what are the factors that lead towards or shorten telomeres? So for instance, if somebody was to have a test and they're like 25 years old, but their biological age shows that they're 35, 45, 55, what has been a contributing factor to that?
Well, everything your grandmother told you and more. Obviously, the one thing that really jumps out, and again, you and I have been blessed with enough years to get to the maturity aspect of things, but a certain degree of moderation. Now, I will say that you and I are alike in that you can never be fit enough, you can never be strong enough, you can never be flexible enough. And the truth is, neither of us, and I don't want to speak for you, but it's a reasonable guess that neither of us have ever even really truly approached our genetic potential. So there's always room to do more, but you mentioned heat shock proteins. These are part of what's called a hormetic response, not hormonal, hormetic. And hormetic response, let's just jump back to Hans Seele, the German physiologist, who essentially proved Nietzsche's theory, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. And the way Seele said it was, the body can adapt to an amazing amount of stress if it's given in small doses and it's allowed to recover. And so this is the art and science of training. That's what I've just summarized proper training to you. And it varies with, who you are, what you eat, what your genetics are, what your spouse is doing, all that. It's a huge, huge personalized thing. And the same thing with your telomeres. I mean, if you've got a resilient system, some amount of stress won't bother you. If you handle stress well, and you have meditative practice, stress release, exercise, stress is not going to bother you. But if you have a lot of stress and you feel that you cannot deal with it and it's causing you, right now we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic, very, very stressful for a lot of people, very frightening. And of course, our news media is making sure that you're all terrified. So, this can stress a lot of people out, especially someone who doesn't have a medical background. And so stress, physiologic stress, physical stress, too much overtraining shortens telomeres. There was a case, I'll use COVID as an example, a 27-year-old, and everybody's like, oh my God, he's 27, see, COVID's going to kill our young people. And if you look at the stats on that, it's extremely unlikely. But this individual was an ultramarathon runner. And so the analogy, you said it yourself about overtraining, a classic yearly analogy, every year there's a race called the Tour de France. And every year, at least 20 people drop out because they get sick. They get sick with pneumonia or viral flu or something like this. There's not even flu season over there. How do they get sick? Their immune system is pounded. They don't have a response. They essentially become effectively immunosenescent. Their immune cells become senescent and can't deal with the stress. So physiologic overtraining, psychologic overstressing, big things. Obesity, a big thing. Smoking, a big thing. Excess alcohol consumption, a big thing. This is why I don't really generally consume alcohol, except on extremely rare occasions. A lot of, the French paradox, have a glass of wine or two every day. I believe that we have reserves in our body. And what I've found personally is that the older I've gotten, the less alcohol likes me. Didn't say I don't like it. It doesn't like me. So I've removed it completely from any habits. So alcohol, smoking, obesity, lack of sleep is a big one. And lack of sleep through a dropping of growth hormone. Trauma, physiologic trauma. One of the shortest telomere lengths I ever saw was in a 36-year-old guy who had been in a bunch of motorcycle accidents. He was a dirt bike rider and had fractured every bone in his body over a period of 10 years. And when you put that much replicative stress on your body, again, telomeres shorten with replication. So when you put anything that stresses replication, makes you create new tissue in your body over and over and over again, and this was the whole bodybuilding thing, you potentially shorten your telomeres. Now, quick aside on bodybuilding. So far as I know, there's been nothing that's shown that bodybuilders, especially, believe it or not, those who use a reasonable amount of androgens or people who are on androgens probably have longer telomeres. I'm not advocating the use of androgens or steroids, anabolics, but there does seem to be a hormonal response both in men and women for anabolics and also for physiologic replacement of testosterone and estrogen in women. Women who go through menopause later have longer telomeres. Women who are on physiologic replacement seem to have longer telomeres. Men who are on physiologic replacement can have longer telomeres. Growth hormone seems to lengthen telomeres. Again, don't play with these unless you're a doctor. That's the bottom line. You really, because there's a very short distance between doing nothing, doing great, doing bad. But there are those things out there. So where you stand in your anabolic slash estrogenic age, what's your hormone balance like? And it's not just the sex hormones. And quick aside for you here, Kris, most people don't know this, but the sex hormones, and this is the reason why testosterone is quite popular, there are more receptors in the brain for sex hormones in both men and women, estrogen and testosterone, than there are in the gonads. So we should really understand that all hormones are globally physiologic, and it's a symphony, and they have to play nicely together. But so far, when you check those things, also high cortisol levels, which happen with two things. Number one, stress and aging. So there's an interesting phenomenon. So let's go back to real quick on telomere length. Okay, something I discussed with you. Okay, we don't have a lot of born with telomere lengths. We've done that study over in Europe. There's starting to look at newborn telomere length. There's a very large variation in what your telomere length is, and a lot of it has to do with intrauterine physiology, how healthy your mom was, how old your parents were at the time of your conception. And so there are people who are born with shorter telomeres, and they wind up in, let's say 45 or 50, and they're 60 years old physiologically, but their attrition curve is not abnormal. So that's one thing. We talked about the effects of stress. We talked about the effects of lack of sleep, which is a stressor. We talked about the effects of too much or too little exercise, obesity. Now, diet is a big one. The only diet that's really been looked at is the Mediterranean diet. Okay, and this was looked at because a fellow by the name of Dean Ornish got a hold of Elizabeth Blackburn, and they did this study, a small study on people, and they were able to demonstrate that telomere length is preserved or potentially lengthened on the Mediterranean diet. I personally believe that a ketogenic diet lengthens telomeres, and I believe it because of the effect on mTOR and what it does. But no one's done that study yet. Big thing, inflammation, aging. Aging and inflammation and aging. There's actually a word out there now called aging, inflammatory aging, and it is a quote-unquote natural, it's a cycle I want to break and you want to break, a natural progression towards the expression of inflammatory genes and a decrease in the repair genes as we get older. And we express more inflammatory biomarkers. We decrease our ability to repair our cells. That's our repair ability. I separate it so you don't say repairability. Repairability implies you can fix it. Repair ability is your ability to fix it. Okay? So all that stuff goes away as you age, primarily because of inflammation. And obviously, inflammation shortens telomeres. This is why I'm an advocate of high-dose omega-3s. And when I say high-dose, it's not high dose to me. It's normal dose. But, the medical science and everybody out there, 6 grams a day, oh my God, you're going to bleed to death. Nonsense. And you mentioned that it varies from person to person. So just like telomeres, you should measure omega-3s. These are all in your anti-aging strategies.
Yeah.
But telomeres is really the central clearinghouse for a lot of pathways. And if you know your biologic age, like you do now, you can intervene, you can change things in your lifestyle and address it. And remember, it's a snapshot. So next year you get another one and you see what it's at.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think it's something that everybody should get done because unfortunately you'll have a lot of people that have that aha moment and they will undo all the bad that they've done throughout their lives when they have to go to a hospital because of diabetes, because of a heart attack or heart disease or something like that. Whereas I feel if you have an insight to see what your true biological age is, because everybody goes by their chronological age. Oh my God, I'm 60, I'm 70. What am I going to do? I'm too old for this. However, if they honestly knew what their true age is, I'm sure there are that's a form of accountability and a sense of urgency to treat yourself better, heal your body, heal yourself. And like you said, do things that are free as well. You can meditate, you can, sleep better, have better sleep hygiene. I found it interesting that you mentioned about the ketogenic diet, because if we look at, some of these blue zones, for instance, that's been studied, there's a lot of nuts and seeds, or dependent on, what part of the world that you're in. What about intermittent fasting with that as well? Is that something that you would combine with a ketogenic diet to, improve autophagy as well and maybe stem cell proliferation?
See, absolutely what I do. And thank you for bringing it up. It almost happens naturally if you're truly full-blown keto. So jump back a few years, back in 2012 when I went keto. I had actually at the time, the woman I was dating was a cancer researcher. And she said to me, you're very strong and you're very fit, but you have a belly. And of course, 30 years younger than me, of course, I'm like, okay, I got to fix that. So I was interested in ketogenic diet as rapid fat loss, but I was much more interested in it from a clinician standpoint because it turns out that a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet has been used with greater efficacy in controlling cancers, not curing them, but controlling them, especially deadly cancers like glioblastoma, brain tumors. And then I met a fellow by the name of Thomas Seyfried who wrote a book called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, and it talked about ketogenic calorie-restricted diets. And what happens when you go keto is most people have a response of satiety to high-fat diets. And so even though they're on a higher fat content, their calories either go same, isocaloric, or they actually go down. And with me, I actually went down. I started not only losing body fat, but losing a significant amount of weight. And so I got rid of my belly, which made her happy, and me happy. And I eventually got to spend a lot of time with Tom Seyfried, supported some of his research, got him out to one of our anti-aging conferences, and learned the actual biochemistry behind keto and how it really does change the physiology of the cell and of the human being. And you talked about the mTOR pathway. This is the one pathway we know for sure seems to intervene in aging processes, a metabolic gateway. And it's extremely affected by ketogenesis and by intermittent fasting. If someone came to me and said, I don't want to do keto, I'd say, okay, intermittently fast. And I'd say go 16 hours or more, keep a tight window, which is what I do. I eat one large meal, usually around between 12 and 2, and then I'll eat another smaller meal around 6 or 7, and then I don't eat. It's just natural because I'm not hungry. So intermittent fasting, absolutely. And I want to stress that there's probably other ways to do this. I mean, we talked about the Mediterranean diet. That's the one that's proven. But remember, the Mediterranean diet, in the Mediterranean, they're eating a lot less, a lot fewer calories. And they also have a high omega-3 intake because they eat a lot of fish. These are, sometimes it's the components of the diet as much as it is the diet, or it's the physiologic metabolic response that you get. And my guess is there's probably a couple different ways to skin the cat, so to speak, and get a longevity response out of your diet.
Interesting.
I like it. It likes me. I like it.
Yeah, because there's so many different trades of thought out there, isn't there? Obviously you have, especially after Game Changers, the vegan profile, and you'll have a lot of people out there promoting the carnivore diet, and obviously the keto diet. I actually did 8 months of cyclical keto with intermittent fasting last year. And I enjoyed it. I really liked it. I didn't, however, I felt great. Like my gut felt good. My gut microbiome felt awesome. I had mental clarity, but I just didn't look as good in my physique as I'd hoped. I didn't have the fullness or roundness to the muscle bellies.
Did you lose muscle? Is that what happened?
I'd say I didn't so much lose that much muscle. I did a little bit. I was smaller then than what I am now, but I was flatter. My physique was flatter. Yeah. I didn't have that glycogen within the muscle bellies to fill it out.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you right now, the area I live in is full of obese people, and I feel like I'm a different species when I go out. I feel like I'm among aliens, or I'm the alien because I'm, lean. And I'm about 6'1", I'm 190, so I'm not small. But I don't have the big gut. I don't have the bloated, I call it carbohydrate poisoning face, that big bloated face with all that glycogen stores that people have. And, in my area, it happens to people in their 20s and 30s. So when I walk out on the street, I do feel like a different species. And I feel like, I'm some sort of alien because, at my age, I'm not supposed to have a six pack, So at any rate, I do it for the physiologic reasons. I did it originally for the six pack, as I said. I didn't want my girlfriend to see my belly. I didn't know I had a belly. I thought I was fine, but So interesting. We just finished a book called The Keto Edge, which is going to be published very shortly, and I tell that story in the book. So it's funny how a boy-girl story can get you started on a whole different career.
Yeah, sometimes it's that, or a picture, or it's an innocent little kid to say something, and it's like, wow, that was the tipping point that I needed.
Yeah, at least I don't have to suck in my gut anymore. Let's put it that way. But I do think there's a lot of physiologic and metabolic reasons, and I think if we did test this, I am reasonably certain, because of its effect on the mTOR pathway, that we would see a significant number of people who stabilize or potentially even lengthen their telomeres. Lengthening telomeres is tough. Stabilizing, shortening, reducing the shortening is easier. Generally speaking, if you don't turn on the enzyme telomerase, which is turned off in 99% of your cells, you will not lengthen your telomeres. So it's important to know that.
Right. Okay. Got it. Yeah. I do reset a lot of my athletes on some sort of keto diet, but definitely with fasting for sure. If it isn't 5 or 7 days a week, it's definitely a couple of days a week on their non-training days where they can psychologically manage it more than anything, And, there's a good friend of mine, that's Sean Wells. I don't know if you know Sean Wells. He's been on a keto diet for about 20 years now because he had a benign tumor in his brain, and he's been able to control it, manage it by following a strict keto protocol.
Yeah. A funny story. When I had my cholesterol tested, it was the last thing I did. I tested everything else, all my inflammatory biomarkers, telomeres, et cetera, and everything was great. And I'm like, oh crap, I'm going to have to bite the bullet. This is back in 2012 or early 13, after I'd been on keto for a while. I'm going to have to bite the bullet and get my cholesterol tested. And I was a little nervous, and so my cholesterol was 201. It was 1 point above normal or acceptable normal for somebody with no risk factors. But 101 points of that was good cholesterol, and bad was down around 70, which is phenomenal. And I also did the NMR, so the actual lipid particles were all light and fluffy, and the least dangerous particles you could possibly have. And I went to my physician, who was actually one of my students, who took over my internal medicine practice when I retired from internal medicine and went strictly into anti-aging and mostly now just stem cell stuff in Mexico. But he wanted to put me on a cholesterol lowering drug. And I said, come on, Tim. It's like, look at the risk ratio. It's off the chart. It's like, yeah, but it says here that, So I'm like, oh my God, it says here. How did I train you, So anyway, there's a lot of interesting information out there. You pointed this out. Same thing with diets. I never pontificate on diets anymore. I just tell people what I do because, people really don't. They take diets almost as seriously, maybe even more seriously sometimes than they take religion. So I'm very careful about, offending people's dietary things. One thing I will say to you vegans and vegetarians out there, do the finger stick omega-3 test, because in my experience, when I treat vegans and vegetarians, most of them have an abysmally low omega-3. And if you want to look at things like cardiovascular mortality, this is why I consider fish oil and omega-3 as an anti-aging supplement. I can't say drug.
Right.
Orange jumpsuit on, but there are drugs now, but anyway, I think it's a cornerstone because it lowers inflammation. It's the single most important arbiter. And if you look at fish oil and telomeres, omega-3 levels in telomeres, fascinating studies, higher fish oil, higher omega-3 intake, statistically longer telomeres, at least less hospitalizations, less morbidity, less mortality. Again, the telomere is longer. The reason probably is the omega-3 intake, but all those things that we talked about, mitigating those risk factors, will at least get you to the point where your telomere attrition is considered normal, and you won't be so much older than your chronologic birthday age.
Right. Okay. So let's say, our listeners have gone to Life Length, they've had their telomeres tested. There's certain applications that they could put in. Obviously, they're going to be customized dependent on that individual, but we've got fasting. We've got like a Mediterranean or ketogenic diet, sleep hygiene, like HIIT form of training, short intervals, like hormesis as well. Maybe you'd throw in cold thermogenesis in there as well. What about other biohacks? Like, Are there biohacks such as like NAD or ozone or, like you said, stem cell therapy that can help as well reduce the lengthening of the telomeres?
Yeah, and you said something that's super important that I want to underline for your audience, and that is that um, I don't normally swear, but I'm gonna come out
You go for
and
it.
semi-swear here. I consider telomere length via the life length test the BS detector of anti-aging therapy. And I consider it the BS detector of whether you're truly healthy or not, because there's a lot of people out there who are doing all the right things that they're told to do by the thought leaders on the internet, and everything on the internet's true, right? So, everybody's doing this stuff, and look, I'm so healthy. I do yoga and Zumba, and why are my telomeres so short? Well, okay, but you found out. You found out that what you thought, see, we've now quantified it for you. We've now got objective data, just like when you get on a scale and do your body fat, that's objective data. When you do an omega-3 finger stick, that's objective data. When you do a lifelong telomere test, that is objective data that gives you so much information about where you really and truly are. You said everybody should do it. I agree 100%. Everybody that can should. And it's just such a central test to tell you whether you really and truly are on the path of health and wellness and maximizing your longevity to the degree that you can. So biohacks. There are so many biohacks out there. Most of the biohacks these days are focusing on methylation. And so NADH and those kinds of things, they're not studying. There was a mathematician by the name of Horvath who came out with a mathematical model, not a clinical model, but a mathematical model. And it was later suggested to be fairly accurate to a degree as far as aging was concerned, called the Horvath clock. And this basically is a methylation measurement, and you're looking for either presence or absence of these methyl groups on your histones, which is part of your epigenetics, which is part of your DNA, which is in the nucleus of your cell. We're getting kind of sciencey here, but it's the other part of gene expression. It's not just genes, it's epigenes. And this is why your environment is so important and your lifestyle is so important, because probably 80 to 90% of how you live and what happens is not genetic, much to the dismay of our geneticists. And otherwise, if it was, when we did the human genome sequencing a long time ago, we'd have come a lot further than we are. And we have this thing called epigenetics, and this is where all that inflammatory biomarker stuff comes in. And there's a lot of biohacks that will improve methylation, all things from supplements like trimethylglycine to some other things. And there's a parabiosis hormone, the GNF11, that some people are experimenting with. Some people are taking something called rapamycin, which is the target. I mean, this goes to the mTOR. There's a lot of things depending on how expensive you have, your tastes are, and how much you're willing to step off the curve of what's known and what isn't known. So there are all kinds of biohacks. One of the big biohacks now that's currently legal for anybody, as long as you can give yourself a little shot like an insulin shot, is peptide therapy. So there's a lot of peptides out there, BPC-157, thymosin beta-4, that can regenerate your thymus supposedly. I don't know if it does that, but it certainly cranks up your T cells. And we're in viral season, so you want to have good T cells and natural killers. And by the way, I want to also point out, this is another thing, is that we measure your white blood cells. We measure your immune system with the life-length HTQ fish. And we are interested in knowing that because immunosenescence is measured in the immune system. Your ability to repair yourself, your ability, how much inflammation you have, this is all centered in your immune system. So your white blood cells are one of the major arbiters of that system. And in that system, I believe that's pretty much the central control of aging, because that's what determines whether you repair or don't repair. That's what determines, how bad the inflammation is or isn't in your body. You mentioned stem cells. We've done some studies, which I'm going to phrase it this way because it's case reports and individuals. I'll phrase it this way. It is strongly suggested that stem cell therapy does turn on telomerase and lengthen your telomeres. And it's certainly anti-inflammatory. So there are those kinds of things. I actually wrote a paper with my colleagues, Dr. Rafael Gonzalez and Louis Geffner. It's somewhere out there. It's been published several years ago, but it was stem cells as anti-aging therapy. And we go into the anti-inflammatory effects of stem cells from our clinical experience and what we've seen in biomarkers. So stem cells are a big one. Peptides, there's a lot of different radical therapies out there that are being espoused by different people. I mentioned rapamycin dosages, GNF11, growth hormone is another one. Some of these are available to, the common person, layperson. Some of them are not. But I would always start with lifestyle modifications, good supplementation, and a good diet, lean body weight, exercise. So you got to start at the start.
Yeah.
It's like, heart disease is going to kill far more people this year than COVID, but you'll see lots of heavy-set people out there wearing masks.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I actually, there was a picture that was online of somebody in McDonald's wearing a mask.
I hope that's your wake-up call, just like telomeres could be your wake-up call. I hope that for some people, the pandemic, if you're going to take care of yourself and you're going to do all this stuff, maybe you want to look at their long-term health, statistically speaking, because unless you're over 70, statistically speaking, you're probably not going to die of COVID. So, and have a lot of comorbidities, by the way, not a healthy 70-year-old. I'm talking about, sick older people. But to see this, I have to. I don't quite laugh, but I have to laugh a little bit because it's my God. You've gotten to this point where you're 150 pounds overweight, but you're willing to wear a mask to prevent this infection because it's an infection. What about the thing that's happening here, in your ticker or your blood vessels like I said, everything your grandmom told you is good for your telomeres, and everything we just talked about, viral immunity, cardiovascular health, incidence of diabetes, arthritis, all related to telomere length. You can do study upon study upon study. Now, there's always outliers and there's always other factors. But what people ask me is, what should I do? I tell them exactly what I just told you. Simple stuff. Modify your diet, take a higher dose of fish oil, do a finger stick test, make sure you're optimal, make sure your vitamin D is fine. Do the test in another year. And let's see, because now we have a longitudinal piece of information from life length of where you're standing and where you're not. You'd be surprised how many people that do. I just did one right before you. A young lady who was doing everything right, but she was extremely stressed emotionally. And we talked about her emotional stress. We toned up her diet, got her on a higher dose of fish oil, made sure her vitamin D was on. And not only has she recouped to her chronologic and biologic ages where they're equal, she's now 3 or 4 years younger biologically. And she was about 5 years older just 18 months ago. So you can improve this relatively quickly, but you got to have the first test to know where you stand. And then you want to do the second one to know where you stand after your mitigations. And each level of test that you do, are you shorter? Are you on a normal curve? Are you getting longer? Are you stable? I had a fellow now who's done about 5 of them since the beginning, and he had a very short telomere length, but it never got shorter. So now he's 5 years older, and guess what? He's now on the bottom of the normal curve, and he was almost off the curve. So sticking around is a good thing.
Yeah.
So that's. And I do want to just backtrack real quick. I said cellular replication, shortens telomeres. That's a big factor. And also oxidative stress. So inflammation, a big factor. Each one of these independently and together can shorten telomere length. So anything that you do to mitigate those things, lower your insulin level with intermittent fasting and a keto diet, lower your body fat level to reduce the inflammatory hormones that come out of fat, reduce your insulin secretion and its effect on your oxidation and your oxidative enzymes. Don't toxify your liver so that it can detox when it faces some of the things that it does. Have optimal hormone levels, sleep well, and get your life length test so you, Kris Gethin, now. You can't hide. Yeah. and you're going to do it. You're going to take care of it. So if you're responsible like you are, this is an essential test.
Yeah, for sure.
You can't hide.
You can't hide. It's out there. It's the transparency is the key. One thing I just wanted to tap onto as well, because I do have a lot of biohackers who listen into this, and they're going to follow everything correctly. However, there's a lot of talk. Obviously, you mentioned rapamycin before about metformin.
Sure.
Now, a lot of people are on the fence. Well, some people believe that taking maybe high levels of berberine, for instance, would be better for them instead. And you mentioned peptides as well. And
Yeah, I don't like metformin as an anti-aging therapy. I know there's a lot of thought leaders out there. There's a particular group of individuals who've been espousing this, and they hold big conferences every year, and all their people are on this. Metformin is, and by the way, so is resveratrol, a mitochondrial toxin. Now, when I say toxin, you've got to put this in context. A small dose is not going to kill all your mitochondria. And resveratrol, a typical dose, is probably not going to do anything bad to your mitochondria. But as you get into the higher doses of any of these, this, by the way, is why it's stopped when you have renal dye. If you have a study and you're on metformin, they stop the metformin, or they give you a different type of dye because it impairs your ability through the mitochondria to excrete and properly detoxify and get rid of that dye through your kidneys. So, again, I think mitochondria are central to cancer. Now, some of the data, initial early data, suggested that taking metformin lowers cancer risk. I would believe that in a person who's got prediabetes or diabetes. I would not believe that it lowers your cancer risk if you don't have those conditions. And it's funny, I just recently did all product videos, and this has got a clunky name, Sugar Balance Support Formula. But in this formula is goat's rue, and goat's rue is the forerunner of metformin. Most people don't realize that almost every drug we have out there was actually synthesized from a natural product. Metformin came from goat's rue. The statin drugs came from red yeast rice. That's the classic example, and all of our highly abused controlled substances came from the opium poppy initially, before they were tweaked and chemically modified and purified and all that other stuff.
Right.
But almost everything. And interestingly enough, if they say it was computer modeled and we generated this on a computer, and they go out and they look in nature, they find it. ACE inhibitors, classic example, the drug for blood pressure. They claimed that it was modeled on a computer and it was designed in a lab, and then they found that there were plants with ACE inhibitors. So most of it is available, and I would agree with something like berberine. I would use that first. Rapamycin is a potent drug. It's an immunosuppressant, and I know they're using low doses, and I'm a pioneer in all this stuff. I do all this stuff myself. I don't do rapamycin, but I've been a guinea pig for all kinds of cell therapies and natural killer cells and stem cells and telomerase activators, and I've designed my own telomerase activator. So I'm with these people. I understand that, but I think you have to also look physiologically at what these things do. So I'm not a big fan of metformin.
Right.
Berberine, I would prefer berberine, yeah.
Right, okay. And one thing you mentioned as well is peptides. Obviously, peptides is a huge buzzword at the moment. And, these sequenced of amino acids, like BPC 157, have shown to have amazing effects. And I know epitalon has been used before now for an anti-aging peptide. Is this something...
Yeah, it's a telomerase activator, Kris, and it's if you're going to get epitalon, you want to make sure that you get it from a reputable lab, and you also want to make sure that you use the subcutaneous form, because the oral form does not work. You have to give yourself a shot. I just did a podcast on this on my podcast channel on my website, and I interviewed a dear friend of mine, Edwin Lee, who's a peptide guru, and we went through all these peptides, and I had been using peptides off and on myself. I've been using thymosin beta-4, and I have to admit, for a while, I used the Barbie drug. I used melatonin too, but I don't anymore. It made me sleepy, like a surprise, But, I fool around with this stuff too, so, but I think peptides are where it's at. I think sooner or later they're going to be regulated, but get a reputable lab, and I'd always recommend you consult a specialist who knows what they're doing.
Right. Okay. Of course.
It's very good. Edwin Lee's book on peptides is very useful. It's colloquial language. It's pretty much just a list of what they do and how to use them. So,
all right.
There's tons of stuff on the internet, I'm sure.
Right. Okay. Of course.
Internet is true, right?
Yeah. Well, we'll put the links in the show notes to the more reputable areas that you provide to us. But I wanted to talk about, because obviously you suggested various lifestyle protocols for myself and supplemental protocols. One of them that I have never heard of before that you explained to me, that I have right here that I'm supplementing with every day, is the Telokynase. Could you tell us exactly what this is that you formulated specifically for telomere lengthening.
Okay. So the reason you never heard of telokynase before was because I recently invented it. And when I say invented it, what telokynase is it's a small single molecule extraction from an herb. And it is not astragalus, because a lot of people say, oh, it's TA65. No, it's not. It has nothing to do with that. It's completely different. I worked for TA Sciences for 3 years, so I'm very familiar with astragalus, with cycloestragenol, with astragaloside 4. I'm a telomere expert. I know all that stuff, and I work with those people. And nothing bad to say about the product, but I wanted my own. So I went to a very different source. And when you look at herbals, especially some of these Chinese herbals, you find about 70 or 80 different bioactive compounds. And then you have to subset those, and you have to test them by chromatography or mass spec. And you look for the properties of these. And there are certain properties that are more common among telomerase activators, although they're a very, very diverse group. And I found a small subset of about 7 or 8, and I was able to narrow them down and find the one that turns on the telomerase enzyme, which is the enzyme that lengthens telomeres. And it's normally turned off except in stem cells and white blood cells. They talk about stem cells being immortal. They really aren't immortal unless they're immortalized with permanent telomerase. And usually that only happens in cancer. So, but you can keep cells alive. They've kept fetal fibroblasts. A friend of mine, Jerry Shea, did this. Kept them alive and forever, for division after something like, I don't know, the equivalent of 400 years old. And there was no cancer in them and nothing like this. So it can be done. And I believe it can be done biologically. Liz Parrish and Bill Andrews. Bill Andrews is the guy who discovered the human telomere gene, good friend of mine, is doing gene therapy now for telomerase installation into the cells. So there are super biohacks. If you have $1 million, go see Bill. But if not, just do the stuff that I'm telling you to do. But telokynase was my own invention, and I told you how I found it. I can't tell you exactly what it is yet because the patent is still pending. But I will say this much about it: it's more potent than some of the other telomerase activators we tested against, although it is still under the 10 times that my other great telomere scientist friend Maria Blasco looked at and found that she ramped up telomerase 10 times in mice, and she had them living significantly longer with significantly less illness at 10x, and there was no increase in cancer. So, we know that at least a 10-time elevation in telomerase is not a cancer worry. And telokynase doesn't crank it up that high, but it cranks it up higher than the other stuff that's out there. So it's telomerase activator. It also turns out to be an antiviral through the T cell helper system, which, believe it or not, the very second batch of this, which you got, one of them, sold out. And I don't know if you know or not, but it is not cheap. It's an expensive supplement. And it sold out in less than a week in this viral epidemic, just gone. So, we're making another batch, actually adding yet another telomerase activator that I discovered to that one. And then we're going to nanoparticulate it. So there's a whole series of things that are going to be done to this. But right now, it's quite effective as it is. And it should. And you'll see next year, lengthen your telomeres and reduce your short telomeres as well. That's the key.
All right. Well, please let me know as these keep coming out as well, the other versions, because I'm going to be on these for life now, I believe. And and obviously I can let my followers know as well. But speaking of which, with their followers, number one, I suggest that everybody who has no idea out there what their true biological age is, please go and do yourself a favor and do this life length test. I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but if you actually type in Gethin, Gethin 15 in the checkout as well, you will get 15% off this. But I'll put all of this in the show notes as well. But Dr. Dave, where can people find you and a little bit more about this test? And by the way, on the website, there is a lot of information there as well. You can see the slides, you can see the videos, all about telomeres and the testing. But about you, if they want to contact you, they want to check out your supplements, the content that you've put out there, where's the best place for them to go, Dr. Dave?
My website is www.the, thelongevityedge.com. So www.thelongevityedge.com. I'm also on Instagram as David Woynarowski. If you want to know me personally, you can get the spelling from the website, or just Dr. Dave. We have the Longevity Edge on Instagram and Facebook as well. And I've just become a little more active on both of those. But the website is still the best source. There are blogs upon blogs upon blogs. And, I've been doing this for a long, long time. So it's content rich. LifeLength, their website is probably the best source to understand HTQ fish. I talk about telomeres and the impact on health and that, but to know the test, to get the information on the test, I would definitely say go visit lifelength.com. And I agree with you 100%. I've been working with LifeLength since 2011. I had given a talk at the A4M, and one of the people in the audience came up to me and said, "Man, you sure know a lot about telomeres. Would you like to work with us?" And it turned out to be Steve Matlin, who's the CEO of LifeLength. And of course, he had read my book, and he goes, "You're the guy that predicted we would exist before we existed," because I had mentioned in there that very soon in Spain, this company is going to come out. And I knew Maria Blasco, who was the pioneer of the test, and that's how I kind of knew this was going to happen. But there was no commercial company when the book was released. He read the book a year later, and he's like, "Oh my God, this guy's clairvoyant," So that's how that happened. But I've been working with him since then, and it is a very enriching, fascinating experience to work with that company. And it's lovely to work with the clients and the patients, and to give them this really vital piece of information. So what you said needs to be echoed. This is something everybody really does need to do, because otherwise you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, and especially, not just the average Joe out there, but a lot of the athletes who think they're doing the right thing because they look great, they feel great, and unfortunately, they could be, like I said, harming their future and decreasing their biological age dramatically.
Yeah. I mean, all of us want to keep doing what we love to do for as long as possible. I mean, that's really what anti-aging medicine's about. People say, "I don't want to live forever." It's like, okay, don't worry, you won't. I still haven't met anybody that has, and I intend to be sticking around for a long, long time. But in my lifetime, I don't think immortality will be achieved. But I do think that the genetic potential, the so-called Hayflick limit of 120 years of healthy, active living, is really critical. And I think you and I got to stick around a long time, Kris, because these youngsters, they really need our help.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm learning from you, and hopefully I'll be able to voice a lot that I'll be learning from you, Dr. Dave. But thank you ever so much for your time today. Like, this has been absolutely awesome. It's been phenomenal. It was it's met my expectations and exceeded them. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions out there. So everybody, if you do have any questions, like I said, I'll put all the links in the show notes. You can also ask questions in the comments. But until next week, Dr. Dave, thank you ever so much.
It's a pleasure, Kris. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And use me as a resource whenever you need me. I really enjoy what you do as well.
Be careful what you wish for now. I'll be calling you all the time.
Don't worry about it. Come see us in Guadalajara for some stem cells.
I am down. I am down. You know that.
I know you. I know you.
All right. Thank you ever so much, everybody. This is the Knowledge and Mileage podcast. Until next week, I am out. All right, guys. Now, if you hear the vacuum in the background, it's because I am getting kicked out. So before I get kicked out, I just wanted to remind you, and the reason why I repeat myself is because I feel that it is so important for you to look after the health of your gut. What point are your pecs and delts and your quad muscles if you do not have your health? And this is why I always tell people, feed your lifeline, not just your vanity project. Now, good bacteria is going to feed that lifeline. And that is why I suggest to you every time on this podcast that P3OM is the Navy SEAL of probiotics. This is what I've been taking for years, and this is what I suggest that you take as well if you want to progressively strengthen your immune system. Now, I'm going to give you 20% off P3OM, which is that Navy SEAL of probiotics, by typing in www.p3om.com/KRIS20. That's p3om.com/Kris20 for your 20% off. I'm getting kicked out, so I'm out.